Disagreement over whether F1's brand new cars in 2026 will be closer to Formula 2 cars in pace has been an unexpectedly polarising point of discussion as next year's rules overhaul gets closer. That the new cars will be slower next year has never been in dispute. The question is how bad it will be. F1 2026 is prioritising cars with less downforce and cornering performance, but also reduced drag and greater electrical power deployment to boost straight line speeds significantly. This has been led by controversial engine plans to attract and appease different manufacturers, with the rest of the rules then fitted around how those engines will work in reality in terms of aggressive energy recovery and deployment demands. In simple terms, we've been expecting slightly slower cars overall and certainly less impressive cars through the corners with less downforce and also reduced mechanical grip from smaller wheels and tyres. This isn't going to be offset by the fact the cars will be slightly lighter than they are now, although that particular change might at least make them a bit more agile in terms of behaviour, changes of direction and so on, which could help racing and, along with bigger braking zones, make overtaking more feasible. But what about the speed? While the average F1 fan might not notice or care if the cars aren't as fast as they are now, a recent claim from likely 2026 Red Bull driver Isack Hadjar would have been alarming to anyone. Hadjar suggested in Las Vegas that, based on his experience in the driver in-loop simulator, the 26 cars are closer to an F2 car. He clarified he meant car performance-wise, while current F2 Championship contender Jack Crawford, who is an Aston Martin reserve and simulator driver, said his experience of the 2026 F1 car was quite similar to drive to F2. Crawford wasn't talking about pace specifically, and in Hadjar's defence, saying it would be closer to F2 could generously be interpreted as simply meaning slower than current F1 cars and therefore literally just closer to F2 in terms of number of seconds. But his emphasis in saying that clearly implied he meant closer to F2 than the current F1 cars, which would be a very dramatic shift. In the last two rules eras, F1 cars have been miles faster than the junior category. Using the Bahrain circuit as a reference, the current generation of ground effect F1 cars was 10 seconds faster than F2 machinery in qualifying in 2022. And for the first Bahrain event under the high downforce 2017 regulations, which were designed to make F1 cars much faster than in the earliest seasons of the hybrid era, the advantage was just over 10 seconds. This year, the peak of the current rules, the Bahrain advantage was just over 14 seconds. Taking Hadjar's claim at its implied extreme, the 2026 F1 cars would be maybe 7 or 8 seconds slower around that track than the 2025 cars, which sounds ridiculous on the surface. But remember, in 2014, when the 1.6 litre V6 turbo power units were first introduced, the gap to F2 cars in that year's qualifying was only 5.7 seconds. So it's not actually that ridiculous to imagine a huge rules overhaul with raw cars and restricted performance could conceivably return to a pace that's actually still a couple of seconds quicker than in 2014. But is that really F1's likely 2026 reality? It probably won't surprise you to hear that more senior figures in F1 were quick to shut down the F2 claim in such drastic terms. FIA single-seater director Nicholas Toumbatsis said it would be silly for the 2026 cars to be faster than the 2025 cars, even though that would be easy to achieve if they wanted it to be the case. The cars in 2026 will be slower than their predecessors because of the direction F1 and the FIA have chosen to go in, but Toumbatsis has suggested the reduction in lap time will only be 1 to 2 seconds from the current pace initially. He said that comments about F2 pace are way off the mark when we asked him about the expected pace drop-off, although clarified his own estimate is track and condition dependent. This year, the advantage F1 cars had over F2 in Bahrain was 14 seconds, meaning with a 1 to 2 seconds reduction, the gap would still be around 12 seconds. That's obviously comfortably clear of the smallest gaps between the two categories in the hybrid era, and much closer to F1 2025 than to F2. And as Toumbatsis put it, we are not anywhere near the "it's not Formula 1" discussion in any shape or form. In terms of how slow they end up being, track configuration will inevitably play a part. That's partly because the car performance profiles are so different. The 2026 cars won't have a drag reduction system as we've come to know, but will instead have movable front and rear wings. They will open on the straights for everyone and close for the corners. So a track with a lot of straights or long stretches will present a lot more opportunity for the 2026 cars to make up lap time compared to what's lost in the corners. An even bigger factor is the electrical power element. Some tracks will present less opportunity than others for energy harvesting under braking, which has an impact on how much electrical power can be deployed. Therefore, the deficit might be larger at a circuit with fewer braking events. This is what Red Bull's chief engineer Paul Monahan referred to as energy-rich and energy-poor circuits. Basically, where it's easy to top up the battery, the 2026 cars are only looking a little bit slower than now, but they are struggling a bit more on the energy-poor tracks. How much is something we won't know until next year. It's also worth pointing out that there is uncertainty about the overall grip level in terms of aero performance in the real world, given the current reliance on simulation and the mechanical grip provided by the actual Pirelli tyres that will be used. That combination can have quite a knock-on effect in terms of final lap times. We will get a glimpse of the pace at the post-season test in Abu Dhabi, where all 10 teams will run mule cars, 2025 cars adapted to the 2026 regulations, and be using Pirelli's finalised 2026 compounds. Those cars, which are just adapted current generation machines with less downforce, are surely going to be far from the finished product, but they will provide a clue, and at least the tyre compounds will be the real ones. In 2026, there will be 5 dry tyre compounds, ranging from the hardest C1 compound to the softest C5 tyre. The C6 that was introduced this year to try to provide more strategic variation will not return because it's not produced a big enough difference to the other compounds already in Pirelli's current range. Speaking of 2026, there is so much to keep track of next year, and you can be first to know the inside track on everything F1 by being in the Race Members Club. Get 50% off your first month in the Race Members Club with our special Black Friday offer. It's a great time to check out the Race Members Club and discover unmissable bonus F1 content from our creators. Our special promotion ends on December 3rd, so hurry if you want to become the ultimate insider. Just head to the Members Club via the link below to claim your 50% discount. The point that the FIA stresses in all of this is that what it expects to be a small sacrifice in overall performance will be a worthwhile trade-off given better racing in 2026 is a key priority. As with the current rules, the FIA wants to make it easier for cars to follow each other and for there to be real overtaking in 2026. One of the big concerns, as we've tackled in a previous video, is that the influence of increased electrical power will just lead to a lot of drive-by passing on the straights as people need to use different energy recovery and deployment strategies. But the FIA is very optimistic about what the new generation of cars will offer in terms of an ability to follow and therefore encourage proper racing. We won't go into too much detail of just how much that has deteriorated over this rules cycle, as the fresh data we've obtained from tests conducted by the FIA merits a deeper look in its own video, which we plan to do soon. For now, we'll just emphasise the takeaways in the data and the expected 2026 improvement that's relevant to this discussion about performance and quality of racing. The current rule set also targeted improved raceability and did achieve that, but it has worsened significantly as the cars have developed. The FIA's original baseline is the performance of cars from 2019, which effectively ran until the end of that rule set in 2021. At 10 metres, the following car dropped to around 55% of the lead car's downforce level. For the 2022 car development baseline, that figure improved to roughly 85%, but this has dropped to around 65% with the current 2025 cars, not far off those pre-2022 figures. At 20 metres distance, or approximately 2 car lengths, the percentages were 65% in 2019, 95% for the 22 baseline, and now 80% as the cars have evolved. Based on the FIA's 26 baseline model, the downforce retained figure will be 80% at 10 metres and 90% at 20 metres. Yes, that's slightly worse than the 2022 baseline, but the FIA argues this time it has not chased headline downforce numbers. Instead, it has conceived rules that will make the cars less aerodynamically sensitive when following and will then produce less of a drop-off in the numbers over the following seasons. Tombazis thinks that the qualities of the cars will actually be better than it's ever been for following in 2026. As 2026 fast approaches, there are still parts of the rules being discussed and tweaked, and one key headache still needs to be resolved. As we've mentioned, one element of the rules is that F1's new cars will feature full active aero on the front and rear instead of a simple DRS on the rear wing. In cornering mode, the wings will have an increased angle of attack for maximum downforce, while in straight line mode, they will be backed off to minimise drag. Drivers will manually activate the different modes in specific activation zones that will be worked out by the FIA for each circuit. The straight line mode will be deactivated in certain conditions though, such as when the safety car is out or if the race director feels there are safety concerns. One such situation is if a race is hit by rain, as it would be deemed too dangerous for cars to be running at high speed with minimal downforce in the wet. This is a logical thing to do, right? But as teams dug into the rules, they discovered a potential unintended consequence. First, there is increased drag from running in higher downforce configuration, having implications for energy deployment and fuel use, even at reduced speed in the wet. Given how sensitive these factors seem to be for 2026, this is not an insignificant concern. But another factor is that if cars were running down straights with wings in high downforce mode, then the forces acting on the car would push it more into the ground and risk the plank wearing away. Because while these new cars won't be quite as aggressive as the current ground effect cars in terms of how low slung they will be, they'll still be running low. As such, there's a plan to shorten activation zones for straight line mode in the wet or other unsafe situations to avoid such potential headaches. Another idea is for drivers to only be able to switch modes for the front wing element in the wet to help avoid the front of the car being pushed into the ground. The exact solution is yet to be signed off, which might sound odd considering it's almost December and the new season is getting very close. But that's just a sign of how complex the process still is in trying to nail F1's 2026 rules revolution.